I'd like to welcome you to the side event of the Philippines. This is by the Climate Change Commission in partnership with UNFAO and the Ateneo School of Government. And for their welcoming remarks, we'd like to call on our Undersecretary and Head of Delegation, Ms. Gloria, for the welcoming remarks. Thank you.
You can say from here.
This is working. Okay, welcome colleagues. In the race to fight climate change, the Philippines has been at the forefront of experiencing the devastating effects of this global phenomenon. Because of this vulnerability, we have made it a policy to be adaptation-centric in our climate actions. However, we also recognize that it would take global action to solve the problem, and thus we welcome this new age of global cooperation through nationally determined contributions. Today, you will hear our representatives from the government and the Academe speak about our experiences in linking our national adaptation plan and nationally determined contributions. We will talk about existing national development plans and programs and how we plan to integrate this into our NAP and our NDC. With this linkage, we seek to emphasize the importance of pursuing the balance of mitigation and adaptation when we pursue climate action. The Philippines is currently undergoing its domestic process for the ratification of the Paris Agreement. It is imperative for us to start the process of formulating our NDC so that our national interests are properly addressed and reflected to allow enough policy space and flexibility for the government to tie our NDC with national sustainable development goals and poverty eradication plans and priorities so that we are ready to comply with NDC requirement under the Paris Agreement as soon as our domestic process is completed. As much as we're speaking about our experiences, we welcome hearing other countries' experiences on your own NAPs and NDCs. Let us make this side event a space where we can share best practices. In the spirit of global cooperation, I hope that today we will be able to learn from each other. Thank you for your presence and for allowing us to share with you the work of the Philippines. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Undersecretary Gloria. And for our first speaker, we're having Attorney Rila Pulo from the Climate Change Commission, and she's going to be speaking about the NAP-NDC linkage.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to see a lot of people here. We just really wanted to share our process so that we can also gain your comments. And as Yusek Glo mentioned, we would be your comments and your practices would be very welcome so that we can continue to improve our process as well. Okay, so hi, I'm Attorney Rila Veronica Puno. I'm the Legal Services Division Chief of the Philippine Climate Change Commission. Okay. Sorry, one moment. Okay, there. So climate change is truly in the heart of every Filipino, and that's for one particular reason. We experience it every day. According to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Philippines is the 4th in the world among countries hit by the highest number of disasters over the past 20 years. A total of 274 disasters were recorded in the Philippines from 1995 to 2015, trailing only the USA, China, and India. Considering the relative size of the Philippines compared to these countries, I believe this ranking may not necessarily be a fair assessment. I believe everyone here must remember Typhoon Haiyan, responsible for more than 6,300 lost lives, over 4 million displaced citizens, and over $2 billion in damages. Our delegation is fueled for this COP, knowing that tomorrow is actually the 3rd anniversary of Typhoon Haiyan. In parallel to global efforts, the Philippines has been very active in enacting policies to ensure that climate change is mainstreamed in our national and local governments. The current law in place is the Climate Change Act of 2009, or Republic Act 9729, which created the Climate Change Commission. The Climate Change Commission is the lead policy-making body of the national government for climate change adaptation and mitigation. It mandated the formulation of the National Climate Action Plan for 2011 to 2028. Sorry, next please. The NCCAP, or the National Climate Action Plan, outlines a specific long program and strategies for adaptation and mitigation in the Philippines, spanning across 3 political administrations. So we're in the middle of this climate change action plan. It aims to address the urgent and immediate needs and concerns of the country relating to the dangerous consequences of climate change to vulnerable sectors. In particular, there are 7 priorities that is addressed in the NCCAP, which is food security, water security, ecological and environmental stability, human security, climate-smart industries and services, sustainable energy, and knowledge and capacity development. In addressing these immediate outcomes, we hope to enhance adaptive capacity of communities, resilience of natural ecosystems, and sustainability of built environments to climate change, and the successful transition towards climate-smart development. So this NCCAP guides our National Adaptation Plan process. The Philippines puts a premium on the multi-stakeholder participatory and inclusive NAP process that supports the country's long-term development vision and medium-term development plan. So there are 3 groups that actually monitor this process, which is the Climate Change Advisory Board. The advisory board was created under the same law that created the commission, and is a group of over 20 agencies, national agencies, that are related to climate change. We also have the National Panel of Technical Experts, which is a group of scientific experts that study climate change as well. And our other knowledge support partners, they overlook the NAP process as we go through it. So they guide the process, which starts with the commission initiating the process based on the priorities under the NCCAP. It lays the groundwork and addresses the gaps in based on the priorities listed. It moves towards the preparatory elements, which starts with analyzing climate risks, moving towards assessment of climate vulnerabilities, a review of adaptation options, and a compiling and communicating plans and integrating them into our climate change adaptation and into our climate change plans. Okay. At the same time, the CCC, with the aid of the National Economic and Development Authority, comes up with implementing strategies and processes and assesses the reporting, monitoring, and review of the entire process. So it goes around in a cycle as we continue to review and monitor what is needed and what are the gaps in the process. Okay, moving toward our NDC process, I'd like to just give a background on how we actually came up with our INDC. So our INDC, which was submitted in October 2015, used the following analytical tools, methodologies, and calculations. So there's the Long Range Energy Alternatives Planning System, or the LEAP, the Agriculture and Land Use Software, the 2006 IPCC software, and so on. So just as a review, these are the main features of our Philippine INDC. First and foremost, we mentioned that adaptation is an overarching priority of the country. As I mentioned, the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable to disasters, and this is why we really emphasize that adaptation is our overarching priority. It also mentioned that we will prioritize mitigation actions that have adaptation co-benefits. And emission reduction will come from the energy, transport, waste, industry, and forestry sectors. So if you notice, some sectors such as agriculture are not included in this because we recognize that in mitigation actions, adaptation is one of the most vulnerable, and so they would need to focus more on adaptation. And then this is our roadmap towards coming up with the NDC. It will start with a revisiting of our assumptions and our parameters. This we will be linking this to the NAP process. We will be reviewing our risk assessment and our vulnerabilities as well towards coming up with the NDC with the adaptation communication as well. After this, we're going to move forward to reconstructing our NDC from our INDC. So this includes studying our calculations, assumptions, and methodologies, setting up the institutional arrangements that we have pinpointed as lacking in the Philippines. The process for creating the INDC was new to us, relatively new to us, and so we have identified some gaps that we have to fix. And we're also looking towards improving our MRV system, towards reporting our first NDC, hopefully in the next few years. And we hope that by working on the process and addressing the gaps that we have identified, we will be able to submit our NDC regularly and with a more robust transparency system as well. So these are the remaining challenges on the NAP process that we have identified. So we recognize that there's a lack of studies on slow onset impacts, which is an impact that is very relevant to the Philippines. We also recognize that we need to improve our methodologies and tools to help us quantify impacts, improve our cost-benefit analysis of adaptation and mitigation measures. This is also in relation to the fact that the NDC will have to include the finance communication on what developing countries will need in terms of finance and in terms of the other means of implementation. So in line with this, of course, we need to quantify what exactly are the impacts that will affect us more and how much it will cost us. We also recognize that vulnerability assessments nationwide have to be reconsidered, and we have to take note of the diversity of local situations. So the Philippines is a country that is composed of 7,107 islands. And each one has a different different characteristics, different vulnerabilities, and each one has to be taken into consideration, which makes the process a little bit complicated. And then finally, we hope to downscale our global climate model so that each island and each local government unit will be able to mainstream them into their own local development plans. So thank you very much. That's all for my part.
Attorney Puno. For our next speaker, we will be listening to the Department of Agriculture through Ms. Perla Baltazar, and to speak about how we integrate agriculture into our two climate plans.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Perla Baltazar from the Department of Agriculture. I'll be sharing with you our program on how the agricultural sector contributes to the development of our national adaptation plans. Okay. First, as Attorney Raila mentioned earlier, our NCCAP priorities includes food security, where the department is taking the lead, and we are also a contributor for the water security and the economic and environment integrity. Now, how do we do this? The department launched its program on which we called Adaptation and Mitigation Initiative in Agriculture, or for short, it's AMIA. We intend, our goal is to build our agriculture and resilient agriculture and fisheries livelihoods and communities by providing integrated support services, so that our local communities would be able to address CC risks and also pursue their sustainable livelihoods. So we have a program. The first part of AMIA is in order for the department to provide an integrated support services, we have first to capacitate ourselves, strengthen our ability to mainstream climate change in our plans, programs, and projects. Next slide, please. So this program, AMIA 1, we have implemented since April of last year, and it's now winding up. And the featured outputs includes guidance for planning based on landscape approach using AMIA maps. So this presents, assesses the risks that each agricultural areas is exposed to. We also had conducted special studies such that we will come up with policy recommendations in order for us to adjust our policy instruments, particularly on research, regulations, and extension. And also the capacitating the DA AMIA teams. We have instituted AMIA teams in every regions. We have 42 units, including 18 regional offices. So we embark on technical and management capability building activities for this. And then after AMIA 1, we now transition to next slide. Please. We now transition to AMIA 2, which we have a successor project of AMIA 1. It's now ongoing. This is involving the planning and targeting for climate resilient agriculture. So this one involves the assessment of the climate risks, exposure, and the adaptive capacity of areas of agriculture and fishing areas. And then we identify our CRA options and pilot this into our model communities. And that from there, we will move to AMIA 2 Plus, which is already the upscaling of what we have learned in our model or pilot areas. So we believe that in order for adaptation measures to be effective, it should be adopted on a nationwide scale. So that is the process where we hope to build the climate resilient agriculture and fisheries livelihoods and communities. In summary, so we have here AMIA 1 that is establishing the enabling environment where policies are mainstreamed, adjusted policies are mainstreamed, the people within the department or those who provide support are strengthened, capacities are strengthened, and we have identified the emerging opportunities. And then after that comes AMIA 2, where vulnerability assessment and risk targeting is a component, and also the identification of the CRA options. And then pilot testing this into model communities and field validate all these CRA options. And while it is being implemented in targeted communities, there goes the support, the integrated support of the department. We provide support for those CRA options that are promoting climate resilient value chains also. So we also take a look not only at the technology, but also for the markets. While we are doing that, we have our knowledge management component, which seeks to develop use-oriented monitoring and evaluation and evidence-based decision support tools. So whatever we have learned in the process, we evaluate and come up with whatever corrective actions if there's a need, or modify whatever we have done which is not perhaps applicable. So that's AMIA 1, and then for AMIA 2 Plus, AMIA 2, and for AMIA 2 Plus, we now embark on the CRA actions and outcomes at scale. While we are doing that, there is a project management and partnership platforms that help us organize all these components so that all of its outputs are properly documented. we are mentioning that the department would provide integrated support services to assist our communities in the implementation of adaptation measures. These are climate advisory, so that our producers, our farmers and fisher folks would know when to plant, could decide for themselves what they should when to plant, what to plant, and the cultural management that they should undertake. Of course, CCA credit is important, and agri-aqua insurance, because even if we have all the technologies, but the extreme event comes, we still need insurance. The technologies, of course, we provide productivity enhancing technologies or CCA measures. Market linkage is very important, so that we will have, of course, market for our whatever we have produced, and other support services. Overall, this is how we contribute, the agriculture sector contribute to the formulation of the National Adaptation Plan. So this is evidence-based, which we foresee to input for our AFMP, the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Plan. That is a short to medium term plan, which then becomes an input to the Philippine Development Plan. Okay. This is a major change in the way we do our planning at the department, because it used to be that we do it on a commodity-based planning. AMIA 1 will allow us to transition from commodity-based to science and risk-based, agroecology sensitive, and location-specific planning. So from there, we hope, considering the landscape planning, essentially, we will be able to achieve food security, inclusive growth, and poverty reduction. To transform this, we recognize that implementing adaptation measures will require systemic changes. And we recognize that support is very much needed apart from the budgets that we have. So we count on our partners who are helping us right now in the development of under the NAP program, who with the German government, the FAO, and the UNDP, for us to develop this and finalize this national adaptation plan to become part of our NDC. Thank you very much.
For our next speaker, Ms. Julia with FAO will be talking about loss and damages in the agricultural sector and how this influences NAP outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is this working? Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's on the panel. My name is Julia Wolf, and I work as a climate change officer at FAO. I think I'd like to say that how impressed I am having heard about how you've been going about integrating all these very different concepts into a very integrated way and a very structured way. So I think there's lots of things to learn on what it means to bring and align the NDC umbrella together with the challenge of cross-sector plans, to sector plans that also have like a vertical dimension, right? So I'm really, I hope you can share the PowerPoint presentations afterwards so I can dig a little bit deeper into it. I was asked to speak today and contribute to the discussion with some thoughts on damages and losses. Actually, the whole event started with referring to the typhoon, and I think that's a very important dimension of the whole discussion as well. So let me see if that works. So I'd like to just shine a little bit of light on the economic dimension. So you are all aware that disasters triggered by natural hazards often undermine national economic growth and development goals. I think we all agree on that. However, it's not clear what's the extent of the economic impact that disasters have on the agriculture sectors, like in a quantitative way. And when we talk about agriculture sectors, we look at crops, livestock, forestry, fisheries, and agriculture, and some other like genetic resources, like all the subsectors including. So for that reason, to have a better understanding, FAO recently conducted an analysis on 78 post-disaster needs assessments. And what we came up with was that actually 25% of the total impact of climate-related disasters in developing countries between 2003 and 2013 had to be absorbed by the agriculture sector. So 25%, that's quite a high number. Next. So if you break that down in the subsectors I have just mentioned, you can see, for example, that crops tend to be most affected by floods and storms. Livestock is overwhelmingly affected by droughts, while most economic impacts of the forestry subsector is caused by floods and storms. Fisheries and aquaculture subsector is mostly affected by storms, hurricanes, and cyclones. So when FAO looked at the wider impacts of disasters, it found that beyond production losses, medium and larger scale disasters can have a significant impact across the value chains as well. So we're not looking only on the damage, we actually have to include in this economic consideration what's the impact along the chains. So with negative consequences on trade flows, on agriculture commodities, sector growth, food and non-food agro industries, and ultimately the national economic impact. So these effects then contribute to cascade down to negatively affect agriculture production, livelihoods, and food security ultimately. I heard food security very strongly referenced in your framework. So that's great that you're reflecting that. On the resilience side, FAO has been working that's like a think model where it's important to understand how vulnerability relates to resilience, and how this, what we often talk about, reducing vulnerability actually meaning adaptive capacity, how this relates in the whole kind of system thinking. So what we need to address with our actions, when we talk about enhanced actions, we need to actually find ways to adapt capacity over a longer term. And that means at many different levels. It means at the national level, it means at the institutional level, it means the adaptive capacity of the individual extension person to better advise the farmer on how to adapt their capacity to respond to the shocks, to have like a better way to go about recover from shocks and adapt to change over time. So I was also very encouraged to hear your multi-stakeholder approach you've been doing when you talk about the NAP. And I think that's actually a formula for success, because the better you understand the stakeholders' different needs, and that includes not only the public, but also the private sectors, I think that's the right way, a pathway to success. So we looked in our work at some of the barriers that actually come about when you look at how to best bridge disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And I think the international community still has to learn a lot on how to better integrate these two communities to some extent. So what we came out like that, just for inspirational thoughts in terms of barriers, is we need to create a governance environment for enhanced adaptive capacity to build resilience at the national and local level, to address risk management in a more comprehensive way. There's capacity constraints, what I mentioned already earlier. It's a lack of coordination, communication, and insufficient fund or competing funds for the same set of stakeholders that are often creating bottlenecks. What's also interesting to see in the Philippine example is actually how how the disaster risk community works together with climate change adaptation. And now with the new possibility of working under the NDC umbrella, I think there's many things where we can still improve in terms of defining indicators to define progress and define success for future in some way. So looking at the NAP process, so our understanding is that it's not a new thing necessarily. I think that what the NAP process brought into the game since 2010, when it was decided by parties as part of the Cancun adaptation framework, is the medium to long-term perspective. So no longer just NAPA, but it's really the medium to long-term perspective. And what we hope that it is a vehicle, it's an instrument in some way to bring the disaster risk community and the climate change adaptation community together, working along the same line. So this slide should basically address some of the common entry points. For example, the NAP process is split into like 4 major steps, which is the element A, preparatory elements. Element C is defining implementations. B means laying the groundwork. Element C is going into implementation, and D is all about reporting, monitoring, and review. So this is basically a reflection how many of the things that needs to happen is actually the same things. For example, it's the same type of vulnerability we need on disaster risk, and for medium to long-term planning. It's maybe expanding the scope, but working more closely together. And so there are many different entry points that actually where there's a high degree of convergence. So that's just as an inspirational thought. What I'd just like to highlight quickly is that, it was just mentioned, based on a Jeff Finance Global Support Program, we engaged with our partner agency UNDP to work with 11 countries, one of which the Philippines is to provide dedicated, tailored support to the agriculture sector under the National Adaptation Plan umbrella. And this has been a very fruitful partnership, because it also shows how the NDC analysis we've done actually shows how important agriculture and also partly, I mean, the loss and damage that is mentioned in the NDC plays out when it comes to economic reasoning and increasing ambition and enhancing action. For example, I'm happy to share with you that, for example, in the NDC analysis, we found 43 countries explicitly referring to damages and losses associated with climate change and agriculture. In 131 NDC, they refer to agriculture and adaptation. So there is a high scope and degree of improving and addressing agriculture food security as part of the solution for climate change, or what we are all working for being here. So these are basically the 11 countries. What the key support packages we are providing through this program is enhanced capacity, as supporting countries that was mentioned in defining a roadmap of what it means for the agriculture sector, but then also working on gender aspects and addressing South-South exchange. So we very much want countries to learn between themselves. Countries are at very different stages. So there's a lot of possibility to cross-learn on possible solutions and how to integrate. So this program has been supported by the Environment Ministry of the German government, which is through the International Climate Initiative, which is an innovative fund to engage in new topics and to move forward on possible solutions and for enhanced action. So as the last slide, this is just as well to share with you the high degree of overlaps and commonalities the climate change adaptation and the disaster risk management topics provide. and in particular also, I think we haven't mentioned that in this event yet, is towards addressing sustainable development goals, because that's now, in addition to all the climate change concerns, it's actually bringing the whole discussion to the question on poverty reduction as of last year, not the 2030 agenda. So there's a lot on the plate, but I think by having a smarter way to integrate topics, to work with, to align stakeholders working on similar topics, there's a great chance that we can actually make a difference for a more sustainable development agenda, and in this particular case for the agriculture sector, and in the end for the livelihoods of the rural people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Julia Wolf. And for our next speaker, we'll be having Ms. Kathleen Capiroso from the National Economic and Development Authority.
Everyone, the mainstreaming efforts in the Philippines of the National Adaptation Plan and the nationally determined contributions. So basically, my presentation will be outlined as follows. First, I will be providing to you some of the enabling policies that guide the NAP and the NDC formulation in the Philippines. And then I will be presenting the Philippine long-term vision and the Philippine development plan framework. And then providing you some of the macroeconomic statistics in the Philippines, and then some priority sectors and interventions in streamlining NAP and NDC. And then lastly, considerations in the mainstreaming process. So for the enabling policies, actually, Ms. Raila Puno has already discussed to you some of the related policies that can govern the formulation of our NAP and the NDC. In particular, we consider the post-development agenda that were initiated in 2015, like for instance, the Sustainable Development Agenda or the Sustainable Development Goals, and then the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and lastly, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. As our USEC Gloria mentioned a while ago, we are in the process of trying to finalize the ratification of the Paris Agreement. So at the national level, this is among the policies that were mentioned to you a while ago by Attorney Puno, which includes the Climate Change Act of 2009, the Philippine Survival Fund Act of 2012, the Philippine Greenhouse Gas Inventory, and of course other policies that are, like for instance, in the Department of Energy, the Renewable Energy Act. So basically, showing to you those international and national policies, we really in the Philippines are serious in really taking into considerations this adaptation as well as mitigation strategies in the development process. So basically, the Philippines has identified or formulated the long-term visioning. So why do we do that? Actually, it was last October 5, just this year, His Excellency President Rodrigo Roa Duterte has issued his Executive Order number 5 approving adopting the 25-year long-term vision. It was initially sometime late 1990s when the Philippines started to develop a long-term plan. However, that plan doesn't push through because it wasn't adopted by the succeeding administration. In that regard, the NEDA, towards the end of 2015, we decided to have a long-term vision instead, not necessarily a plan. It aims to provide or to align aspirations of the Filipinos with the administration's, the current or the future administration's priorities and strategies. So basically, this will guide the development process as well as guide in engaging international development partners. In the development of the long-term vision, there were focus group discussions as well as surveys that were conducted to basically to assess what are the aspirations of the Filipinos. as a result of this, you can see in the slide that about 80% of our population would like to see a simple or comfortable life, wherein they will be able to provide their basic needs daily, not just having food to eat, but some expenses to spend in other various needs that they would have. And then they also would want to see their children being educated, being able to finish their education, and then they would want to also have time to travel in other places within the Philippines and also outside of the country. Also, as you can see, they also want to own their own place. While Philippines is a very close family ties, most of them would really desire to have their own house to live in. With regard to the vision for the country, the results of the survey shows that the most of the answers is to see that the Philippines will be no longer in a poverty situation wherein the government is very fair, and then the society experience a very fair justice system wherein people that are culturally diverse can be thriving, as well as with regard to many disasters that we are experiencing, we can still, adapt and be resilient to it. We actually have an initial roadmap on how to really operationalize the long-term vision. It is actually not yet final, but actually these 4 items that you can see, that reflects how we envision the 4 time slices that we see for the implementation of the long-term vision. As you can see, the long-term vision will be covering 4 administration, like for instance, for the 2017 to 2022, wherein it is our current administration, President Rodrigo Duterte. The initial ambition that we want would be a prosperous, predominantly middle class society where no one is poor. So particularly in this particular PDP, the focus would be on eradicating or addressing poverty, because as you would know, 21% of the population is in very poor condition, and out of that, 8% are really extremely poor. So in the Philippines, poverty and hunger is really a problem. For the next tranche of the Philippine Development Plan, or the second timeline, it would be more on creating a healthy and resilient society. As you would know, the Philippines, while we are having or experiencing a good economy, the problem of disasters and economic losses is always a limiting factor. So for us, this is also one of the areas that we really need to improve on. Along with this is providing education to our people, so that they will be more innovative to really institute changes that would be really beneficial to the economy. And then the third time slice for the Philippine Development Plan, it is envisioned that there would be a smart and innovative society. So being able to benefit from the first 2 Philippine development plans that will be implemented, it would be more on further strengthening those strategies regarding education, building resilience, and other uh, infrastructure support, so that in that particular year, there will be more smart and innovative society that we will be envisioning. And then for by 2040, it is where we actually would want to see high trust society, wherein people are very confident to each other, wherein regardless of culture, we really engage and work together. This is just an illustration of how we see the vision, or the long-term vision that we would be formulating, or we have formulated. As you can see, at the top is the vision, and then that also in that side is the 10-point agenda of the President Duterte. It is also aligned with the SDGs and other international commitments like the Paris Agreement and the Sendai Framework for Action. Well, not to mention other international commitment where the Philippines is signatory. So as I've earlier said, the vision would be translated into 4 Philippine development plans, which will be across different future administrations. So as earlier mentioned, it would be for 25 years. And this will be really showcasing the aspirations of Filipinos. So regardless of administration, we would want to see continuity in what the government is doing. So just to provide you a glimpse of the Philippine development plan for this particular administration, because this is actually triggered by the recently signed memorandum circular for the formulation of the Philippine development plan. So the Philippine development plan will be basically having 3 major pillars. One is on enhancing the social fabric, wherein it would focus on clean, efficient, and citizen-centered governance, swift and fair administration of justice, and then lastly, promote awareness and value cultural diversity. The second pillar is more on reducing inequality, wherein the focus is more on to expand economic opportunities, increase economic opportunities, accelerate human capital development, and reduce vulnerability of the poor. And then the third pillar is more of the increasing growth potential, wherein technology adoption will be promoted, innovation will also be encouraged. And here we would want to see that there would be no cultural divides and there would be no uh, very large gaps between the rich and the poor. So these pillars will be founded with very basic 4 considerations like ensuring peace and security, accelerated and strategic development on infrastructure, building resiliency, and lastly, maintain ecological integrity, clean and healthy environment. As you can see, environment is also given importance here because without a very intact environment, all possible interventions would really be just derailed or will not be realized. So in the Philippines, environment is also big given attention. This is just to show you the interface of NAP and NDC PDP as well as the long-term vision. So basically, the NAP and the NDC are 2 not very different pillars, but these are interlinked pillars that would be needed in implementing our development plans because these will be part of the strategies that would later on be captured in the different sectoral plans of particularly, for instance, as earlier presented in the agriculture sector, wherein they have integrated adaptation strategies. And then as they haven't presented, but in other departments as well, like the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Energy, they also have identified several adaptation and mitigation strategies that later on will be included in the planning exercise that NEDA will be initiating in the development of the PDP. This is just to show you that, for instance, the Philippines has been experiencing growth over the years, but you can observe that towards the end of the for the last 5 years, the Philippines has really experienced a great increase. Like for instance, we have more than 6% GDP growth. This is very important to emphasize because without really incorporating climate change adaptation and mitigation here, it would be difficult to achieve the targets that we want to achieve for the Philippines. This is also a very important slide because this shows that there is really a need to incorporate adaptation actions because as you can see, about 1% of our gross domestic product is eroded because of the disasters that we experience every year because the Philippines on the average has 20 typhoons that visits the country. So without really providing better adaptation and disaster risk reduction strategies, it is definite that we will not be able to pursue the goals that we want to achieve in the long term. For the long-term vision and for the PDP, the sectors that we would want to focus on are the following. For instance, housing and urban development, wherein the priority would be on construction, improving housing designs, urban planning, and providing utilities like, for instance, water. Then manufacturing sectors, it should be focusing on food processing, housing related, and other construction and transport activities. Then the connectivity, this is more related to infrastructure facilities like roads, bridges, port, airport, transport service, and communication. Then the education services, it is, as initially mentioned to you, it is to really capacitate our community and our people, particularly the young children, so that they will, when they grow, they will be more innovative in providing more creative solutions. Along with these sectors are tourism, financing, health, countryside development, and agricultural development. Priority interventions in streamlining NAP and NDC into the PDP. So basically, the PDP, while it hasn't been completed, it has already been it has already identified some of the possible adaptation options that should be put in place. These are not yet cast in stone because we are still in the process of consulting with other stakeholders the possible strategies that will be be identified or included in the PDP. The priorities are food and water security, climate responsive health sector, climate resilient infrastructure, ecological integrity, sustainable consumption and production, renewable energy and energy efficiency, sustainable urban transport, green industries and green jobs. Not to mention the need to include risk transfer mechanisms, like as earlier presented by our colleague from FAO. These, while right now as presented, it's very generic, but later on when we try to develop our Philippine development plan, it would be more, we will be trying to make it more detailed to incorporate sectoral adaptation and mitigation actions, which I mentioned in various sectors like forestry, coastal and marine energy, health. So this is not cast in stone, but these are some of the possible sectors that we would be focusing on. So considerations to streamline the NAP and the NDC and the development process. So basically, as you can see, policies is very important. But in the Philippines, we are lucky to have those very good policies that would really be guiding us in the implementation of these actions. And then institutional arrangement should be identified. This is basically one of the areas that we have to really improve on, because in the Philippines we have a lot of agencies doing different activities or strategies depending on their mandates. So given that climate change is not just a problem of one agency but would be requiring collaboration with different government agencies, there is really a need to, of course, have this tightened, so that coordination would become very smooth, particularly in delivery of adaptation and mitigation actions. And then climate change initiatives should be budgeted. As one of the good thing that we have, that's why we are planning in the PDP, is for us to identify priority interventions that has to be prioritized or to be budgeted through our budget through our Department of Budget and Management. So basically, if we have identified those priorities, it would be easier to lobby for financing or to request for financing. And then appropriate monitoring and evaluation system need to be put in place. So basically, it's not just implementing actions, but we have to really look whether those actions that we have implemented, if they are really successful, and if they really addresses impact, if they really addresses vulnerability of sectors and communities that were identified. And then this is what we did, long-term planning, because climate change is not just in short term, but it would be translated in long term, not just in this generations, but it will affect other generations as well. So long term planning is really a key in this kind of uh, development process. So basically, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kat. And for our last and final speaker, we have Dean Antonio Lavinia of the Ateneo School of Government.
Thank you, Alex. I'd like to be actually brief. The work that I will present is the work that my university, that an Manila University, have been doing. We have been doing a lot of independent intellectual and academic work with a lot of consultative processes within that to see if we could jumpstart in helping our government first ratify and then implement the Paris Agreement. So this cluster of work we call Getting Our Act Together because, in fact, that's what we actually need to do in our country. We're quite a big country, more than 100 million people. Climate change is a complex issue for us. Sometimes we simplify it to being vulnerable, but actually we're not just that. We're also a middle income country that's growing fast with high GDP expected. And therefore, the two interests that we have in the climate change process has always been on one hand to make sure that we are able to address our vulnerability, and the international process helps us address our vulnerability, but also that we make sure that whatever commitments we make, whatever international framework on emissions reductions that is done will not in fact hinder our development options. I mean, and so we always try to balance the two. As a veteran of these negotiations, this is actually my 18th COP with 4 COPs in the middle that I missed or that purposely took a leave of. And I have this sort of historical view of this process, and it's always this dual interest is what we've tried to achieve, and the process that we are in the ratification is actually about these two. How can we maximize the Paris Agreement to address our vulnerability, and how can we ensure that our commitments in the Paris Agreement serves our development objectives, our development needs, and do not constrain us. And as an academic institution, we've tried to help the government think through with this. So we have actually produced, and copies of that are available outside as well as electronic copies if you ask for them, and the link, we'll give the link later on. We produced 3 papers in time for the COP. I've actually briefed government agencies about this already coming here. Hopefully it also informs our negotiations here as an independent input by an academic institution. The first is climate proofing our development agenda, which is really just laying down the basics of when we ratify the Paris Agreement, and which we hope will happen at some point soon. When we ratify the Paris Agreement, we make sure that the way we do it is that it serves the development needs. And the way we define it is very simple, because the Philippines just had an elections, and President Duterte, our new president, have laid out his development vision. It's a 10-point development vision, which we agree with. It's a very good development vision, pro-poor, inclusive development. So we looked at how the Paris Agreement can implement, can be used to move forward this 10-point agenda, and we were actually able to identify seven of those 10-point agenda as being assisted, being helped by the Paris Agreement. One of these is the promotion of rural development. We know that there are provisions in the Paris Agreement about land use and about adaptation, about finance and capacity building, so ensure security of land tenure, the promotion of science, technology, innovation, the improvement of social protection programs, increase in infrastructure spending that would be consistent with also our climate vulnerability, the investment in human capital development, and the increase in competitiveness. And we make the case in our policy brief that the 7 priorities of our new government will actually be achieved if we ratify and implement the Paris Agreement. And then we move forward, and that's the most important part for this first policy brief. We move forward by identifying the things we have to do if we are serious about the commitments we will make in the Paris Agreement. I mean, there's actually quite a lot of work to be still done. I mean, it's not just a number, as I keep on saying. The number is almost immaterial as far as we are concerned. The more important thing is to be able to achieve, address the specific actions, identify the specific actions to quantify them, so that we still have the right number that we want to eventually finalize as our offer in this process. And then to actually get things done. And the report identifies the data needs for that, the data choices that the government needs to make. We identify the institutions that need capacity building, including the people that we actually need to have internally within the government to get this going. Financing, of course, is very, very important in this process. Particularly, the Philippines did give an NDC that was unconditional, which, by the way, we are recommending to the government to reconsider, to have a better mix of conditional and unconditional NDC in its final number, including then the possibility of modifying that number if you find the right mix of supported and unconditional NDC. And then the last point we make in this brief is the importance of the private sector, particularly because energy is obviously the elephant in the room for the Philippines in terms of the commitment we will make, the nationally determined contribution we will eventually make. So we do have a separate brief just on energy and optimizing our energy mix. This is independently written. I was the principal author for all of these papers with several co-authors, but we engage very intensively with the Department of Energy, very intensively with the power sector, both the coal power, coal, renewable energy, all the different the utilities to get to our recommendations. I mean, but we take responsibility for our recommendation. And essentially, what we are saying is we have to reduce our dependence on one energy source, and in Philippines, that's clearly coal. Increasing our flexibility to take advantage of very rapid renewable energy developments that are happening as megatrends all over the world. And we actually think this can be done, increasing both conventional and emerging renewable energy through full implementation of policies in the Renewable Energy Act. And I mean, we give very specific provisions and suggest very specific issuances by the DOE, and eventually legislation that is necessary to get this to happen. So far, we see the colleagues that we're working with in the energy department as actually very very welcoming to this process. I mean, and certainly the legislature, particularly the Senate, and we think the House of Representatives in the Philippines are willing to address what we've identified as some of the legislative priorities to optimize our energy mix. Whatever number we eventually give, whatever mix of supported and unsupported NDC commitments we make, energy needs to be a part of that. It's probably the biggest part of that, and so we need to do it right for energy. But at the same time, we've always said, and even as my team here, including myself, is a strong RE supporter, strong climate change, emissions reduction advocate on a personal level. It is not acceptable for loss of access of electricity, access of power, as an option in dealing with this, because that is the worst thing you can do, including for climate change advocacy, including for RE advocacy. So whatever we do, we have to make sure that we're able to address that development need. Finally, our last briefing paper is about an enabling environment to support the optimal energy mix, which I talked about earlier. And I guess this applies for almost all the other sectors on the NDC as well. We sometimes have the wrong thinking that the NDC will be implemented by the government. It really, of course, legally, at the international level, it's the government is responsible for that. But in a country like the Philippines, it's really the private sector. It's really communities. It's really consumers that actually will have to do this. And what we need to figure out is what's the right enabling environment to do that, including identifying the investment opportunities. We also have the misimpression sometimes that when we say unsupported, supported NDC, that is government to government exchange, right? It's not going to happen. We know it will not happen in energy. We know it will not happen in many of the economic sectors. So those investment opportunities have to be with the private sector. And we need to be able to monitor that. We need to be able to frame that as investment opportunities. And we need obviously able to get international partners for that to make that happen. I mean, and in that when I think when that happens, I think we'd be in a good shape in this process. So I'll end with with the hope that the Paris Agreement is able to, for the Philippines, and I guess for all developing countries, serve both a global need to address climate change, a global issue, but it won't work if it's not addressing local development needs. I mean, and the president now, having come from a local governance background, from being a mayor, has been very, very insistent on that, including on the economic development plan that's being developed now, that it has to be localized. And I think that's also the success of the Paris Agreement is that. If it's going to be just our meetings here, I've attended 18 of those 22 meetings, lots of, frequent flyer miles that I don't use and haven't used at all for many, many years. But it's useless if we actually don't localize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. We have around 5 minutes left, so we can take around 2 to 3 questions from the audience for our speakers. And if you have any more questions, you can just approach them after the event. Would anyone? Yes, sir. 1 and 2. Okay.
Uh, is this on? Okay.
Yes.
I'm Ian Rivera from the Philippines. Now, we believe that the NDC is really, really important to drive our direction towards low carbon scenario, and with that also sacrificing our economic growths. We also see the importance of the stakeholders' understanding of the NDC and its unity towards that. However, we are also concerned why there's a delay in the process in coming up with the NDC. And second, related to this question is about the energy policy review. It's not been, it didn't take off. And we in PMCG were so concerned about that because there's 36 coal-fired power plants on the pipeline, and these are around 11,000 megawatts. So if this will be online either before or on year 2022, so by 2030, around 70%, based on our study, around 70% of our energy mix will be tied to coal. So what's the explanation about this?
Thank you, sir, for your question. May we have the second question as well, so the speakers can just answer it together in the interest of time.
My name is Justine Kalma. I'm a journalist with the Ground Truth Project, a media outlet based in Boston, the United States. My question is about the Philippines' role more on the international stage. That last year, the Philippines led the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and this year, has not ratified the agreement. So, what do you see the Philippines' role in global climate talks under the new administration?
Thank you. I guess any one of the speakers can, if someone wants to go ahead and answer the question. Dean?
I'll tackle the first one. We're no longer the chair of Climate Vulnerable Forum, so we should not answer that. That should be now directed to Ethiopia. But we do help, and we continue to be a member, and I think we're in the Troika now. All right. So, but we should not speak anymore for the CVF. What's very clear under our president, I just cleared it with our head of delegation now, is we will be re-emphasizing our positions on common but differentiated responsibility, on historical responsibility of developed countries. We've always done that and consistent with that. Even when we were even in Paris, we always do that. But we have been instructed to re-emphasize that in the negotiations, particularly because we're now with the Paris rule book, a very important that we have a Paris rule book, that the rules of the game for the Paris agreement are able to serve our development needs. In fact, one of the issues that the president has pointed out is as asked, in fact, the technical people, is whether or not the Paris Agreement actually binds developed countries to provide finance. And, any lawyer here that follow this agreement will tell you no, except that, no, as it is, except that you can negotiate further in the Paris rulebook to have a better finance deal that will actually be more responsive and push that further. So the answer actually is no and yes, right? In other words, it all depends on how you end up with the Paris, with the kind of rules in the Paris Agreement. And so the idea is to be part of that whole negotiations and to do it with a very strong developing country perspective. And that's why one of our negotiators, Bernadita Smuller, is the chair, the coordinator for G77 in finance, and he has just the full support of the Philippine delegation to doing that, so we get the best finance deal possible in these negotiations. You want to respond to the energy review?
So for the first question, for the INDC review, I echo your comments that it has to be a multi-stakeholder, whole-of-government approach, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been holding INDC review sessions with different multi-stakeholders. We actually held one in Davao and one in the Visayas region. So I know that the change in administration kind of complicated that a bit, because of course we need to educate and we need to inform the new incomers of what the INDC is and what its implications are. But it is moving forward. We've been doing the review process, and in fact, we've also recently started the work on the EO 174, which is the GHG inventory, which will be taken over by the agencies themselves rather than a separate group doing the inventory. So there's been movement in the improvement and the finalization of our NDC. Next, for the energy policy review, actually under the executive order which mandated that, it gave us 6 months to study that and to finish that. The resolution that mandated that gave us 6 months, and it will be ending in December. And in fact, next next week is the climate change week, where there will be a nationwide seminar or policy review of the energy policy process. So same with the NDC, it's moving forward as well. And then, yeah, that's it.
Does any one of the speakers have anything else to say? All right, and with that, oh, sorry, sir, do you have a question? Okay.
No, we're confronted with a very difficult dilemma. The president to abide and commit whatever this body that's representing is now in this conference. And that's admirable. But the whole trouble is this involves 3 presidencies. Can we tailor cut our commitment so that we can really fulfill the commitment of this presidency and only raise expectation for the forthcoming presidency? 70% is going to be delivered 14 years from now. And knowing our politics, how can we play the game of making a commitment so that the commitment somehow will be fulfilled? Although we're making calculations. So, Tony, being a hard planner, come and speak. Let's hear you say it.
Thank you, sir.
We're telling the world community, this president is sincere. When he wants to do something, he will do it. But he can only do it for the coming 6 years. And yet, the past government committed, as this young fellow said, how many power plants? Oh, ilang megawatts? 11,000. See, you're going to be breaking an economic contract that will send the government bankrupt if they sue us. We're confronted with a difficult dilemma of delivering. The question is, if you want us to deliver, can we ask the world community to give us, to look at devices, legal, financial, economic devices, so we can deliver? That has to be worked out in the negotiation process. Don't you think, Tony?
Well, I'll
You've been
speak
with
as
me since Berlin. You should be able to answer that.
we were in Berlin together, sir. I will answer that on my personal capacity, of course. While I'm here on my NGO capacity, not as a government person, so I think I can be candid about it. I'm actually not worried about that because I've actually worked with 5 presidents on this, from President Aquino, the first President Aquino, to to now with the current president, and I've seen that every president eventually comes around to the issue because of the real problem of climate change. The moment the problem is no longer abstract, if it's gonna be just about emissions, it's abstract because you don't see emissions. If it's about carbon, forget it. You will never be able to convince your policymakers, your highest policymakers, to pay attention to it. But if it's about people, if it's about people dying, if it's about people getting sick, if it's about food, as our colleagues from the Department of Agriculture, if it's about jobs, right? Then it becomes very, very real. And I've seen every president come around. I mean, quite honestly, this president, the quickest. In 6 months, she's 9, just come around. I mean, President Aquino, it took 4 years before President came around to because the 36 power plants were decided just before that. I mean, and then we still had a few more. And I mean, and so of course, my bias is from my president when I was a government official. President Ramos did come around very quickly because he was a military man. He knew that climate was an important issue. That was from the very start. But having said, I'm not worried about that. And what I'm worried about more, and that's why in our report we built that, is our institutions. Because it's not the presidents that matter, it's the institutions. In this case, it's the Climate Change Commission, it's NEDA, it's the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the Department of Agriculture. That matters, that they are actually able to internalize, to integrate, to mainstream climate change in everything that they do. Our DBM, our Department of Budget Management, to internalize all of that. Because if we did that, uh, uh, then we'll be able to have a consensus to get our act together. And I mean, that includes stakeholders. Indeed, we have to bring in indigenous people. You have to bring in farmers. You have to bring in workers for a just transition, because we too have just transition issues. It's not just a developed country issue. Just transition in a low emissions, low carbon economy. We have to do that. So for me, about the delay, I welcome the delay. I honestly welcome the delay in finalizing the number of the NDC, even in the ratification, so we can have, in fact, a debate that can get the act together. Because if we don't have that debate that get the acts together, if let's say the agencies are just told, ratify, concur, and but they don't really want to, what's the point? I know from my experience in government that if government people, especially at the middle level, etc., do not want to do something, they can stop anything. So you have to get them all to be part of that whole process and get to own that. I mean, with stakeholders from the private sector, from communities, from indigenous peoples, etc. Once we do that, it takes a little bit longer than usual. Once we've gotten our act together, it will be much better, even in the negotiations here. But we're in that process, obviously, of getting there and not yet there right now.
Thank you, Dean. I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah. We are engaging in changing attitudes and behavior. I think there's a missing ingredient in most of the discussion. You have to crystallize, popularize scientific data and in cultural symbols that people understand. This is where effective communications is essential to reach the people to understand. Look at what happened to Leyte. They didn't understand uh, ocean surge because it was in English and it wasn't made to be understood that you have to get out because you're going to be overwhelmed by water. Uh, so it's very important that in all of these discussions, I know everybody has to be technical, but the cultural uh, womb must be integrated in these discussions. And hopefully, you will see when you said it means people, we're showing the portrait of refugees, their suffering, their sorrow, and the instant call for humanitarian global emergency response that becomes the call for a real substantial understanding of the energy. We're not blaming the president. We believe he is very sincere from his drugs battle to uh, now necessarily with pollution, because this all involves the security of our people.